It's about intentional, quality, one-on-one time with each of your children, with your spouse. If you separate the parts, you will strengthen the whole of your family. And that's something now we've been doing for 12 years. There's probably 300,000 families using what we do now.
Welcome to the Next Level Income Show, where it's our goal to take your income, your investments, and your life to the next level. I'm your host, Chris Larson. If you haven't yet, get a copy of our book for free at our website, nextlevelincome.com. That's www.nextlevelincome.com. Just click on the book link, and I'll even send you a copy if you put your address in. On today's show, we have Jim Sheils, a real estate expert with extensive knowledge in the build-to-rent niche. He's a partner at Southern Impression Homes, a company that specializes in building rental portfolios in Florida's high-growth markets for individual investors and institutional buyers. In addition, Jim is the co-owner and co-founder of 18 Summers. 18 Summers provides family education services to entrepreneurs and professionals seeking to strengthen their relationships while succeeding in business. As well, we're going to talk about Jim's awesome book, which I've read and implemented with my family on today's podcast. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, good to be here.
Yeah, man, I am excited. We read your book earlier this year, and we're going to kind of share a little bit more about 18 Summers with the audience and kind of the impact it's made on our family's life, and kind of how you came up with that later on in the episode. But first, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your background, Jim, your professional background, as well as your company.
Yeah, I guess what I'd be considered my main vein, which other things came out of, is being a real estate investor. 24 years ago, I just took a leap. I went and looked at tons of different businesses, and real estate kept calling my name. I liked the tangibility and the strategies I was coming across. And I saw a quote that 7 out of 10 millionaires in the US have made their money in real estate. And I like those odds. And I came from the Northeast, New Jersey area near Wall Street. I never liked that. It didn't make sense to me. So I went into real estate 24 years ago, the classic starting with one property. And I remember hyperventilating when I got that first property under contract. So I'm like, how am I going to with $152,000 for a 3-family house, but that was the starting point. And I slowly, surely, with many steps back, went into bulk rehabs, foreclosures, bulk foreclosures, renovations. And then about almost 10 years ago, saw some writing on the wall of how could I scale differently and start to avoid things like the 3-year curse, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, provide myself and clients with better properties. And we fell into something that's now called build-to-rent.
Yeah.
And build-to-rent is building property specifically for high-end rental or higher-end rental and the ability to resell down the road. And that's what we focus on now. And that was an experiment about 9 years ago. We did about $3 million in new construction build. And then last year, $185 million in sales. So we've been able to blanket it across Florida. And it's been the best niche that I've been a part of to not only give us the best I see to build a portfolio that really lasts for that freedom of time, freedom of space to do things you want to do without a lot of the headaches. And that's why I hung up my rehab shoes many years ago, and I only do new. So that's my main focus now. And as you know, we were talking before, I have 5 kids, and I'm never say I want to spend as much time with my family as that I can and my friends. So I always want to leverage my business to be running as best as possible without me having to miss that part of my life.
No, I love that. And, our listeners are well accustomed to, the story about how real estate can provide financial independence and time freedom, those sorts of things. But it's not always the case, right? It can be creating another job in a lot of ways, especially in the single family side. If you're doing your own work, I know quote unquote investors who, do their own repairs, and they get, stuck in this position where they're self-managing, to get that cash flow. Would you mind sharing a little bit about, your initial strategy, Jim, buying that first property? It sounds like I bought my first property was a 3-bedroom townhouse at the age of 21. Yours was similar. It sounded like you paid just a little bit more than me. Mine was just under $100,000. But why did you start with that? What was your original plan?
I had taken some real estate classes. I got really clear that I liked this thing called real estate investing. Going, wow, I can leverage. I don't have to come up. When I looked at stocks, if you bought $100,000 of stocks, you had to come up with $100,000. Yeah. If you were buying $100,000 piece of real estate, maybe $20,000. I said, gosh, that makes sense. And looking at that, I had learned a couple of simple recipes. What would you look for? Like, you buy it for this and your mortgage would be this, and you can rent it for this. And if those numbers match up, it'd be a good deal. Or if you have to repair this. So yeah, that first property in Lompoc, California. I was out in California, which people, oh, you can't find affordable property near the coast. I was in Santa Barbara, a very affluent area, but 45
Wow.
minutes north
No.
was northern Santa Barbara County. Lompoc was a very different market than Maine Santa Barbara. And I just found an agent that was crazy enough to start putting in my offers. And we made an offer on a three-family house. So this was your classic don't want her. It was a old landlord that had died. His children were given the properties. I guess he had five properties, and two of them been swiped right away. She showed it, and they were asking 150,000. So I asked for 152,000 with 2,000 in closing costs. I went, big, and
Yeah.
and that was my first deal. And it was your classic. I knew if I could buy it and I could fix up each unit, the rents were at like 680 at the time, and I knew it's were more like 950, 975. So it just had those little levers to pull. But I was
Yeah.
terrified. I was terrified because this is all things I had read. I had never put the rubber to the road, Chris, and
Right.
I don't know about you, but people always go
Yeah.
back to me. And I've spent a very high six figures, if not seven figures now, my education and mentoring and consulting. And
Absolutely.
people say, what's the best real estate class you took? And I'm like, oh, that's easy. 432 North M Street by far. Because
Yeah.
all the things I've been learning for the 2 years before, very hyper focused on learning real estate investings. Unless you pull the trigger, it's all kind of useless. At
Yeah.
some point, you got to put the cards on the table. You got to step onto the playing field, and being able to see when you're on the playing field, you start to realize some things are just more fringe or the garnish. Other things are the
Yeah.
meat and potatoes, right?
Yeah.
And that's what that first deal taught me. And it also started to teach me the mechanics of how to do more deals and how to do more deals at volume. But you got to start with that one.
I love that. And yeah, I mean, I spend more now on an annual basis, Jim, than I made as an early professional,
Oh,
you know,
easy.
and it's absolutely invaluable, I think, not only to receive coaching and mentorship, but also to coach and to mentor. It's interesting how you
It
learn
really
those
is.
lessons and you stay sharp when you're helping others that are early on in the process. And also it helps your blind spots because you say, wait a minute, if I can't explain this, or maybe I'm not, if it's maybe it's not working anymore, maybe something has shifted and done that. But you mentioned something else, and this is a conversation I have with investors a lot. They say, well, I'm going to do my research, and look, I'm that guy. Like, I spent a year doing research before I invested in my first multifamily property 10 years ago. So people ask, well, how long did it take you? And I said, I explained the process and what I did. And I say, but the thing is, until you invest that money, let's say you write a $50,000 check, you're just not going to care as much. You're not going to pay
Oh,
as much attention. And there's just something, about actually doing it yourself. And that applies. I was telling my 13-year-old son this, I said, practice is one thing, but a game is a different thing. And,
yeah.
you gotta do both. You have to practice. You also have to get yourself in the game and do that. So that's such a good lesson. Um, so, and then, you said, you were scared to death. So for those people that are out there that are listening and saying, hey, like I've done all this research. I've done it. When is the right time, in your opinion, to make that leap, make that jump?
The right time is when you have a level. Here's the problem. You have to, I believe, develop a level of proficiency, which I think you can do within a year of understanding real estate fundamentals. You're
Yeah.
not going to be a guru, nor do you have to be, or an
Yeah.
expert, but you're going to be proficient. And with that level of proficiency, that's the time to try. Because the problem is, I remember in the first 5 years I went into real estate, Chris, there were guys, they were brilliant at breaking down the strategies, explaining the numbers, and they were always just about to make their first offer. And that and that
Yeah.
really telling for me, where I was like, wow, these people are smarter than me. I don't understand some of the strategies, but they're not putting anything to use.
How about
And
that?
so I think what the good news is,
Yeah.
it's very rare if you've done your proficiency and you do some checks and
Yeah.
balances. We have this buildup, like that first townhouse or that first three-family home that I bought is going to ruin my life. It's going to bankrupt me. It's going to, it's
Yeah.
that happen. Yes. Are the odds lower if you've done some proficiency, homework? Yes. And the good news is as well that get the momentum going. It's like when you first start lifting weights, you put a little bit on the bar and then a little more and a little more. And so that should encourage people.
Yeah.
It goes both ways. And also on the other side, that first townhouse or that first three-family house wasn't going to retire us.
Right.
People put this pressure like that first deal, if it's not retiring,
Yeah.
I'm not. Well, that's silly. This is singles and doubles. This is building blocks. And you got to have extra moves in the game to be able to get that level you want to get to. So if you're trying to put that first deal, man, it's got to like basically retire me. Well, I think you're never going to start. The same way of having fear that it could ruin you, the fear,
Yeah.
the expectation it needs to retire you. That's something I've seen as well. And I think I used to put that pressure under myself. And just now I look back and laugh and go, man, that wasn't realistic at all.
That's such a great lesson. And, I like to tell investors, like I'm kind of a Moneyball kind of guy. And if you haven't read Moneyball, it's actually written by one of my favorite authors, Michael Lewis. And I love his Wall Street stories and everything. But, if you're going to the plate and you're trying to hit a home run every time, you're putting all that pressure on yourself, it's more glamorous. It's more fun to talk about at cocktail parties. We all know the story with Bonds and Sosa, and that's exciting. But those guys strike out, more often. And
Oh, yeah.
if you can get up and say, "Hey, look, I'm just going to get on base, single. Maybe I'll hit a double. I'm just going to get on base and less pressure." It's easier to do that because there's a lot more field to hit to, and I think that sometimes we do a disservice to our younger members in society when we say, "Oh, take risk early in your life." It's the corollary to that is swing for the fences. Go swing for the fences. And if you follow that path, like I just said, it's, hey, don't be afraid to strike out. But then what happens is if you strike out several times, now you're in your 30s, you're in your 40s, maybe you have student debt, you got a family, you got a house, you got some cars. Well, now you have created an environment where you kind of are trapped. And
Yeah.
if you just started out, like you said, Jim, and said, "Hey, let's just hit some singles and doubles for 10 years, create some cash flow, over a longer period of time." Now, how much risk can you take if you're financially independent by the time you're 40 years old? It can be
Exactly.
unlimited. You mentioned you piqued my interest. You mentioned the 3-year trap. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Oh, the 3-year curse. Yeah.
3-year
So,
curse. Sorry.
um,
Yeah.
so, doing, over 1,000 rehabs and,
That's a lot of rehabs for those that are
yeah,
listening.
done a lot
Yeah.
on my, and including my building partner, that would double,
Yeah.
versus new construction property, building a property from start to finish instead
Yeah.
of, classic model, which I support. It was my first avenue from near poverty to wealth, fixer upper homes.
Yeah.
Here's what I found though, Chris, the 3-year curse. I was buying tons of houses here in Northeast Florida from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even if I did a new roof, new heating, cooling, new plumbing, updated kitchens, baths, the whole nine, after 3 years, it would just set in that I needed to up my budgets for maintenance and repairs. And with maintenance and repairs and that kind of things, turnover was, and it's not that these are bad houses.
Right.
You just have to be really aware and realistic, because a
Yeah.
lot of the times we won't take true inventory on that. And again, I
Right.
watch it happen,
Yeah.
and that's where it can get pretty dangerous. And this 3-year curse, I really like it. I mean, I own old houses, so I'll still deal with it. But a lot of our investors, like you said, that we work with, Chris, it's our job to save them time. They want
Right.
to game without creating a second job.
Right.
And so, management intensity, tenant turnover, that's not what they want. So once we started to do the new construction, being 9 years in on this now, we still haven't seen the 3-year curse. And why is that? Well, we're building right from scratch. So the building standards are different, how
Yeah.
we're laying them out, the desirability of the overall plan. You can get tenants to stay longer, and also we're building in a little higher area than where I was rehabbing properties to make them
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
and that attracts a better tenant, which is easier on the property.
Absolutely.
So 3-year curse, it relates to older properties that you just have to account for more maintenance and repairs. It seems like
Yeah.
3-year mark, those things start to require more. And with new construction, 9 years in, we still have not seen that.
Yeah, no, we've seen the same thing in our multifamily properties. And yeah, it's interesting. I talk to investors, I talk to coaching clients who are like, "Oh, I'm getting a 30% cash on cash return on my property." And I say, "Okay, great. So who's managing it for you?" Because we're talking about time freedom. "Oh, I manage it myself." "Oh, well, how much money are you setting aside annually for maintenance and repairs?" "Well, I haven't had any of those yet. So Okay. What about turnover? I have no my tenants, I've been able to rent back to back. So, it's interesting, you have these investors that are early on and they're not treating, their first one or two rentals really like a business. And when you talk to a bank and a bank says, "Hey, Jim, we'll give you 75% of your rental income as credit." Why is it 75%? Because the bank knows you got to set aside about that much for all those things that I just mentioned. So I really think, when we had our single family rentals, we set aside basically 30%,
Yeah,
10% for management, 10% for repairs, 10% for vacancies. And hey, if those numbers were lower, great. We turned a bigger profit in that
exactly.
year. And then we also see that today we have gone from 70s and 80s built multifamily to newer, sometimes in case newer construction. And one of my favorite areas, and actually our top performing area in our portfolio, are builder rent properties. Jim, I think we have 5 if you count the apartments that have a builder rent component. I guess share a little bit about what are you building? Townhomes? Are you building single family homes as build to rent? What types of properties are you guys building for your investors?
Yeah, we're in about a dozen different markets in Florida right now, and our main menu, Chris, is single family duplexes and quads. So everything
Love it.
that can
Yeah.
be financed under residential real estate,
Yeah.
because people want to get that better rate, and we have what's great for us now is we've gotten to the level where we can pre-buy mortgages, which is key right now. So we're buying stuff
Yeah.
for our people and getting them locked in at 4.75, which in today's market, pretty unheard of. It's
Yeah.
expensive for us, but it's good for our cash flow. So we stick
Right.
to that residential. Now, with that said, we build whole duplex communities and quad communities, and we've worked with several family offices, small
Yeah.
syndication groups, even Haven Realty, who is, JP Morgan's arm of property ownership. So, we've worked with some of those bigger guys, but individual investors is
Yeah.
our big bucket of business. Where people who are looking to build a small portfolio of probably 5 to 8 properties, which is our average people. And again, it's solid little soldier without that second job.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I imagine you probably have better management. You have the ability to scale management when you're building in these communities as well versus somebody running around all over town to individual properties.
Yeah, well, let me give you a story on that, Chris.
Yeah, I would love
About
to.
2 years ago, we were around 2,000 properties, and our property management was getting spread thin. And what we found was there was about 200 properties, which I call bottom 10% of our portfolio. Now, remember, when you have a property management company, you don't own all the properties, you also manage for other people. Well, there's about 200 properties in our management company that were in tough areas that, my partner and I didn't personally own in, were definitely deferred maintenance properties. And when you're a manager, you get stuck in between the middle of a landlord not wanting to put in money they should and a tenant who's screaming. You look like the bad guy.
Yeah.
And what was funny about these, Chris, is these properties, as a manager perspective, they were the most amount of work and they brought in the least amount of revenue as a manager. The
Yeah.
rent was lower, so the amount we collected were lower and fees were
Yeah.
lower. So what we did is we lightly fired those 200 properties. We said, where are these? They're in tough areas. The landlord's not doing the work. We look bad. And it brought back so much of our ability to serve our other clients because it wasn't
Yeah.
all being wrapped up in this. And that was our big aha, where the new construction, like I said, really does allow us to be in better areas with better condition. And if you're in better areas, better condition, and you're set up properly, you can attract better tenants.
Yeah.
That just gives an overall flow to the goal, which the
Yeah.
goal is to have real estate, but again, not be involved with it on a day-to-day. Most clients, they want to spend, a half hour a month on their portfolio and that's it, and let us do the rest of the work. Tougher to do in old properties in tough neighborhoods. Easier to do in a little higher end neighborhood in new construction.
Today's show is sponsored by Money Insights and their investment optimizer strategy. In my book, I share how I use this same strategy starting over a decade ago to invest my money in 2 places at one time. This strategy has been used by the wealthiest for generations for estate planning, minimizing taxes, preserving wealth, and increasing stability for their investments. Now you can do the same thing. In addition, you can build a plan to build an emergency fund, pay for college, fund a business, plan for retirement, and ultimately optimize your total financial picture. To find out more information, check us out at the banking link at nextlevelincome.com. I love that. And I think, what you just described, Jim, can be applied to so many areas in life. I've talked to my wife about, she's an architect. I was like, hey, you can raise your fees. And I'm like, who are the people that give you the hardest time about paying, your rate? And she's like, oh, they're the ones that have the smallest projects and give me the most trouble and all that. It's the Pareto principle, right? It's the 80-20 principle. And if
80/20.
you can, yeah, if you can look at those bottom 20 and do an inventory, if you're listening, in your life or your business or your investments, and say, hey, what are those bottom 20%? Can I take that? What happens is you take that bottom 20%, and it's probably about 80% your energy. What if you could devote that same energy to your top 20% or your new top 20%? What would that do in your life? It's amazing if you were able to do that. And that really brings us kind of to the next part of the conversation, which is buying back your time. And Jim, I read your book, the family board meeting. It's made a tremendous impact in our family. And we've been talking about the vehicle, which for both of us has been real estate in our investment lives, our investment careers. And I'd love to talk about demographics and Florida and why you moved from California and all that. But really, I think the question is, like you've alluded to several times, how do we create more time to do what's important to us? How do we buy back our time? Can you tell us the story behind 18 Summers?
Yeah, I think from the real estate realm, I got invited to come to some pretty big stages at a very early age, well before I had a family. And Chris, it's the old saying, don't get too close to your heroes, because I was able to get on stage and then I was able to get backstage. And what I saw on stage was there were guys who had really big balance sheets, and had really good slide decks, a picture of their family in the Caribbean. And I said, wow, that's cool. But when I got backstage, their lives were a mess. They had no relationships
Yeah.
in harmony. They were in shambles.
Yeah.
And that scared me because I was not too proud to say that could be me.
Yeah.
And so I always said I wanted to, for 18 summers, as I started to build my own family, like I talk about in the family board meeting. I have
Yeah.
5 children now, 3 adopted, 2
Amazing.
biological. And it makes you think of time that you have. And I have a good friend of mine, David Bach. He's a 9-time
Yeah.
New York Times bestseller. He's a friend,
Automatic millionaire,
automatic
right? And
millionaire,
yeah, et cetera.
finish rich for women.
Yeah.
He's been a big friend and mentor. And he said it to me years ago, Jim, the years are not all created equal. And
Mm.
what we used to get, Chris, I don't know if you got this, was there was really bad advice out there, especially let's stick with real estate investors. Hey,
Yeah.
put your head down for the next 5 to 10 years, your family will understand. I think that's horrendous advice because the years are not all created equal.
Yeah.
So I wanted to figure out how can this grow in unison, in synergy. If I'm successful in real estate investing, I want to be successful at home at the same time. I
Yeah.
don't want to be a successful real estate investor and a failure at home. And at the same time, I've gotten really clear. I love doing interviews and having conversations with this, Chris.
Yeah.
I am more interested in being famous at home than I am being famous in our industry. It just doesn't matter that much to me. I want it,
Absolutely.
it provides for me. I
Yeah.
love the brainstorming and the strategies around it. But when all's said and done, I'd rather be famous at home.
Yeah.
And that helps dictate a lot of what I've decided in my career, taking
Yeah.
inventory of where do I want to be, how do I want to work, who do I want to work with. You got to make some tough decisions. But what I've found is anyone who's telling you that as a real estate investor, you just need to cut out family time and that's the price that it costs, I just don't agree. And I think that for 18 summers for me, I wanted to help create a community, and kind of a learning resource that people could fall on, like you and I, where they didn't have to be family therapists or psychologists to figure out how can I stay in harmony with my family as I grow my business. And that's what
Yeah.
18 summers is all about.
Yeah. Man, I forget where I heard this. You may know. I'll be really embarrassed if it was you. But it's the juggling analogy. And I used to juggle quite a bit. So I used to be in math club too in the band. So I'm kind of a nerd at heart. So I'll just not even sugarcoat that. So when you're in middle school and you're playing instruments and you're juggling in the math club, in your spare time, you just have to kind of accept where you are in life. But so I love this juggling analogy because it says you have your career, you have your health, you have your you have your friends, you have your family, and you can juggle all these balls, but there's one glass ball, and that ball is your family.
Yeah.
You can't drop that ball. You can't
Yep.
drop that ball. And it's you can set your career aside for periods of time or your business, and you can pull back. You can even sacrifice your health at times and get that back as long as it's not for too long. I talk about that a lot on the podcast, so people know how much I think health is. But if you sacrifice your family, you may never get it back.
Yeah, I agree. The years are not all equal, and that
Yeah.
just goes back to
Yeah.
that again. And yeah, right. That ball will shatter.
Yeah.
It will not bounce
Yeah.
back. And unfortunately, being in this now a dozen years, getting to work with some incredible organizations out there, had family retreats from all over the world with some pretty cool, influential people. We all are challenged by the same issues. And so just because you are famous, just because you do have a big balance sheet, doesn't mean you can escape this. That's
Yeah.
what the aha came. Sometimes that can make it
Yeah.
even worse.
Yeah.
And so the good news is we're all in this together. And what I've learned, Chris, this is one of the most encouraging things I can say out there. In over a decade of doing this, working with thousands of families, I haven't met one perfect family, not one. And what I've gotten clear on is whoever created that silly, awful saying of the perfect family really did us a disservice, because we don't
Yeah.
even realize how much pressure that puts on us, our
Yeah.
marriage, our children.
Yeah.
It's not about perfection. It's never been about perfection. It's about bridging imperfections and
Yeah.
making the most of the time we've got together. That's it.
Yeah.
At least that's
Yeah.
what it's for me. And I think if we can keep that, and you take a little bit of that perfection pressure off, like
Yeah.
it's gonna show up in your relationships, the camaraderie, the fun, the adventure, the trust, respect in your family life. And it's doable. I don't prescribe to the stigmas out there. Oh, once they reach their teen years, once they, I don't prescribe that. And I haven't. And we're far from a perfect family, but we also haven't had to go through the norms of what people have said.
Yeah. No, I have a saying, and when it comes to family and relationships, I say, and I am sugarcoating this, but I say effed up is normal. People say, "Oh, I went through this, I went through that," and I said, "Oh, you're normal. Like, don't worry about it."
Yeah.
And I tell people, and this might raise some people's eyebrows, but Malcolm Gladwell talks about it. He talks about desirable difficulties, and one of the things he talks about in David versus Goliath, David versus Goliath, is children that lose parents. I lost my father at 5, and I say I'm lucky because I knew how important and how valuable the time is with children, and that really drove me for a lot of years to achieve the financial ability to spend the time with my boys. Now I get to coach my son's cycling team. After we wrap up today, I'm going to be taking my boys to the cross practice, and I get to hang out and watch them. And I know that they're not going to be here in the house day to day for that much longer in the grand scheme of things. And when I read The Family Boardroom, I'd love for you to talk about the methodology, because what I loved is the simplicity of it and the ability, like you just said, to not have to be perfect. It's very simple in its strategy. The time seems almost insignificant in a way, yet I found it to be so powerful.
Yeah. Well, going back to 80/20, right?
Yeah.
It results 20% of the activities.
Yeah.
And that's what we see here. And probably like your background, I was gifted at a young age with knowing it didn't last forever. Not because I went through your loss, but my father did. My father lost my grandfather when he was 6, and it lived
Yeah.
with him,
Yeah.
my grandmother,
Yeah.
for as long as I can remember. And
Yeah.
so it always gave me an understanding. I lost my dad 2 years ago,
Sorry.
but it gave me, but again, like to hear how much luckier I got, moving forward from my dad and your experiences.
Yeah.
I always had an understanding of that. So I said, how do I harness this? It's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
And what I found is in some of our entrepreneurial pursuits, there's some good things that can cross over. Not everything. Everything can cross over from entrepreneur life to family life, but rhythms can, and I would talk to people where, I talk to my biggest clients once a month, boom, on this day. every week I have a finance meeting with my accountant Thursday from 12 to 2,
Yeah.
go over it. Well, my children, I figured out, are my, thinking in that entrepreneurial mindset, whether it sounds impersonal or not, it's very deep to me. They're the most important investors, clients, team members, whatever you want to call them. So I need to set
Yeah.
time for them. So I designed a rhythm very easily that every quarter I spend a half a day with each of my kids one-on-one. And there's only 3 guiding principles, and it's all in the book, but
Yeah.
I spend it one-on-one, intermittent tech fasting, and we do fun activities.
Intermittent.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So
Intermittent tech fasting. I love that. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah, so
Sorry.
that
I cut you
no,
off.
no,
And I
I'm
think you
glad. No,
popped out
no,
of that. Yeah.
no, I'm
That's
glad
so
you.
good.
Yeah, that was something we coined a few years ago, where it's
Yeah.
like, what we're not giving up electronics. I'm not telling you got to move to the survival oriented antenna,
Yeah.
but there's times where you have to be completely and totally unavailable. Just like if
Yeah.
you use intermittent fasting for your
Yeah.
health, then you're not giving up eating, but there's disciplined
Yeah.
times between this time and this time I'm not eating.
Yeah.
And when I'm spending this one-on-one days with my children, what I call board meetings, um, I'm one-on-one. My wife is not invited. My friends are not invited. Their friends are not invited. Their siblings are not invited. We're putting the magnifying glass on that one relationship,
Yeah.
positive way, and it rarely happens.
Yeah.
You're rarely, especially if you come from a big family, able to have that. I never remember that with my father
Yeah.
ever. And
Yeah.
so one-on-one, the intermittent texting, and then let them plan the day. I want to know more about my kids' gifts and talents and interests. Well, let them plan a day with you at a
Yeah.
young age. My
Yeah.
son, 20-year-old, he owns his own charter fishing business today. He's an
Cool. Yeah.
entrepreneur at heart. Guess where
Yeah.
he wanted to go on a lot of his board meetings? He wanted to go fishing.
Yeah.
And so you just never know what would come out of these things. And truth be
Yeah.
told, if I have the chance, Chris, to go surfing or fishing, I will choose surfing 10 out of 10 times. So it's not that I love fishing.
I'm in that same boat. No pun intended.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get it. So,
Yeah.
but that's what it's about. And what I
Yeah.
found is if you will set this rhythm with each of your children, it starts to keep, your relationship synchronized.
Yeah.
That one drum beat keeps the whole song together, right?
Yeah.
And my wife always calls these kind of the reset for each of my child's relationships with me. Every 90 days,
Reset. Yeah.
in a half day together, one-on-one, without electronics, intermittent tech fasting,
Yeah.
and then doing a fun activity of their choice. And then at the end, we spend some time to talk.
Yeah.
And you know what happens when we talk, Chris? This is not some like Hallmark movie, like long conversation all the time. Sometimes we've had a few of those. Other
Yeah.
times, this conversation could be as short as 3 minutes. And usually, what I've found that I was not very good because I just wasn't raised that way. It's the opportunity, Chris, where in all the busyness, I've been able to deliver to them directly without distraction, a sincere compliment or a genuine apology. And that's
Oh,
really important. That's super important because a lot
yeah.
of times we don't. And as entrepreneurs that are busy, sometimes we give ourselves immunity and we don't deserve it. You know how hard I'm
Hmm.
working. I'm running 2 businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might have bulldozed over them or been like that or forgot to compliment on something we're working hard on, but I'm working hard over here. Look, that'll work for a while, but come
Yeah.
those 18 summers, the best way to get your kids coming back for more once they reach the 18 summers is to do those first 18 summers right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's what the day's all about. It's about intentional quality one-on-one time with each of your children, with your spouse. If you separate the parts, you will strengthen the whole of your family.
Yeah.
And that's something now we've been doing for 12 years. There's
Oh,
probably 300,000 families using what we do now. And what I love, you gave me that compliment. We've been using it. We're seeing it works. And gosh, it's so easy. I mean,
yeah.
that's what I want, user
Yeah.
friendly. If it wasn't
Yeah.
all over the place ADD entrepreneur like me, wouldn't use it either. So
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to say for everyone else.
I know. I got a lot of heads shaking up and down on that one. Well, and what's neat is my boys are in a school, and look, most schools have like an odd day off, like Monday or Tuesday, like a teacher work day, and we use those days for
Yeah.
our family board meetings. We say, oh, what are we going to do this Monday when the kids are? Well, hey, we're that day's blocked off. That day's blocked off. And, we tell the boys, hey, this is, and now my son's actually asked, like, when's our next board meeting, Dad?
Which
When's
is
our
the
next
best
board
feeling.
meeting? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get to say, well, what do you want to do? And Now here's what really the light bulb went off for me, and you just kind of explained it, Jim. Saying, hey, like we do this in business, right? We have our board meetings, we have our quarterly meetings. I was in sales. I ran sales teams for years. We would have our quarterly meetings. I would sit down with my individual. I would have a call every week with every one of my reps. Every quarter, I'd sit down for a detailed meeting. I do the same thing. It's really interesting. We go and we talked about the importance of coaching. We seek coaching to help us in the gym. We seek coaching to help us in our business. But you go and you seek a coach for your marriage, and people say, "Well, that's weird. You're going to a counselor? What's wrong?" Mm-hmm. I had a good friend, fortunately, that was going through a divorce, and he said, "You guys seeing a counselor?" I said, "No." And we were trying to figure out some stuff with my older son at the time. He goes, "You should." And I'm like, "Yeah, but we're not having any problems." It's like the old dandruff commercial, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he goes, "You should go start seeing a counselor, talk through these things and develop." And I was like, wow, how cool is that? And I don't mind telling people that my wife and I still do that. And we're actually now in a couples mentorship group. And guess what we do? We meet once a month together, and then that inspires meetings. So not only have we applied the family board meeting with our children, but my wife and I are doing something similar in our relationship. And look, whether it's, if you can do it in your business, you can do it at home. And like we were just saying, Jim, the cool thing is it actually doesn't take as much time at home and with the people that you spend as much time with as it does in your business necessarily.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that goes back, Chris, to a lot of people's high expectation. Like, family is very personal. There's a big pride. I mean, if our family life is lacking or malfunctioning, we take that very personally and very hard, and because it's important to people. But again, that pressure out there of the perfect family, the perfect marriage. Yeah. I don't prescribe to that. It's about bridging imperfections. And when you look at that, we're never shy, my wife and I, on our podcast or in our business meetings, to talk about challenges that we've had, things that we do, couples therapy or couples events or, same thing with our children. And if we're just open to that and don't put the pressure on us, well, we should know how to make this perfect on our own.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine if we did that if you and I had taken that approach with real estate investing, we'd own exactly 0 properties right now, most.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about abundance and scarcity mindset, and it's the same thing. It's like you kind of shut down. You don't want to look for help and do those sorts of things. And we inherently know it's not good in business, yet somehow we don't think the same rules apply at home. So again, a sincere thank you for what you've done for our family. And listen, if you're listening to the show today, real estate is a vehicle. It's a vehicle to help you create more time in your life. But if you have sacrificed those things that you want to spend time on, then what is it really for? So I encourage you to check out 18 Summers from Jim. I encourage you to check out the family board meeting. And what's neat is when you have that motivation to spend more time with your family, to do those things, it makes it easier to do the work and spend the time to develop the financial acumen and financial resources to actually make it happen. So Jim, thank you for being on today. What is the best way for people to learn more about your business with respect to real estate, as well as 18 Summers in your book?
And to learn about both, you could really go to the JJ Playbook, jjplaybook.com. That's actually about our second book coming out at the beginning of next year.
Awesome.
About how did we leverage build-to-rent real estate to buy back our time and create a legendary family life. That's what it's all about. And all legendary family life for us, Chris, is doing all the things I dreamed to do as a child, but we never could do, and then getting back to our fathers, all the things my dad struggled with money his whole life, all the things he wanted to do that he wasn't able to do, I've kind of picked up the torch and I'm continuing to do on a couple of things. And that for me has been worth its weight in gold. And that's all from the of real estate. So go to jjplaybook.com. That'll start to introduce you to that.
Awesome. We'll have that in the show notes here. We'd love to have you back when you launch your new book to share it with the audience as well, Jim.
Thanks, Chris.
And again, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thanks for sharing with our audience.
Thanks, Chris. Good being here.
Hey, Chris here again. I hope you found this episode valuable. Now, I have one more thing to gift you. We have a page for my coaching clients where you can get a free copy of my book, as well as much more from previous guests on the show. Just check out nextlevelincome.com/coaching to get a free copy of my book, audiobook, and much more. I'll send you a copy of my book and cover all the shipping costs as a thank you for listening to the podcast. Also, please like, share, and take just 90 seconds to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts.